The Exile. The purple dust devils of Calvara's wasteland danced across the horizon like demons celebrating another victim, and Sarah Vane knew she would be that victim before the twin suns set again. Her knees hit the scorching sand as the transport vessel's engines faded to nothing more than a distant whisper, leaving her truly alone for the first time in her 24 years. "Please, Council Elder Torvin," she had begged just hours ago, her voice cracking with desperation. "There must be another way to secure our alliance. I will serve in any capacity, go anywhere, do anything, just not this marriage." But Elder Torvin's violet eyes had remained cold as the void between stars, his weathered purple face showing no trace of sympathy. "You were born for this purpose, Sarah Vane. Your bloodline was chosen specifically to bind our house to Warlord Draxon's military strength. Your refusal endangers every soul on Calvara." "Then let me fight for them," Sarah had pleaded, her hands gripping the council chamber's railing until her knuckles paled. "I have trained in strategy and diplomacy. I can serve our people in other ways." "A woman's highest service is through marriage and alliance," Torvin had replied, his words as ancient and immovable as the mountains. "You reject this truth, you reject your people. The wasteland will teach you the value of what you've thrown away." Now, as Sarah's lungs burned with each breath of toxic air, she wondered if she had been a fool. The ceremonial exile robes they dressed her in offered no protection against the caustic wind, and already she could feel the poison seeping into her system, making her thoughts slow and heavy. Her purple skin, usually vibrant and healthy, had taken on an ashen quality that she recognized from the few exile survivors who'd returned broken and compliant. She had seen Draxon Morth only twice, but twice was enough. The way his cold black eyes had assessed her like merchandise, the whispered stories from his previous wives' servants about bruises hidden under elegant gowns and screams muffled by thick palace walls. Sarah had known in her bones that marriage to him would be a death sentence, just a slower and more painful one than this desert offered. The first sun was setting, painting the purple sand in shades of deep violet and crimson. The temperature would plummet soon, and without shelter or water, exposure would claim her before the toxic air finished its work. Sarah's hands trembled as she tried to dig into the sand, some primal instinct driving her to seek shelter even as her rational mind accepted the inevitable. "I'm sorry, Mother," she whispered to the empty desert, thinking of her mother who died in childbirth, never knowing the daughter she had sacrificed everything to bring into this world would reject the very purpose she had been created for. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what they needed." But even now, even dying, Sarah couldn't summon regret for her choice. She had seen too much cruelty disguised as duty, too many women's spirits crushed under the weight of tradition. If her death could be her own choice, her own act of defiance, then perhaps it meant something. The sound hit her ears before her fading mind could process it, a mechanical screaming, wrong and harsh against the desert's natural howl. Sarah lifted her head with the last of her strength and saw something impossible, a streak of fire across the darkening sky, metal and machinery where only biological ships should fly. A human vessel, here on Calvara, violating every treaty and boundary their peoples had established. The ship was clearly in distress, spinning and trailing smoke as it hurtled toward the desert floor. Sarah watched with detached fascination as it impacted perhaps half a kilometer away, sending up a massive plume of purple dust. Her vision was fading, the edges of consciousness growing dark and soft, but her last thought before oblivion claimed her was oddly peaceful. At least she wouldn't die alone, even if her only companion in death was a human stranger who'd never know she was there.
Unlikely sanctuary. Lieutenant Marcus Reed had survived worse crashes, but not by much. His entire body felt like one massive bruise as he dragged himself through the twisted wreckage of his scout ship, searching for anything salvageable. The portable oxygen recycler was still functioning, thank God, along with the emergency medical kit and 3 days' worth of rations. Not enough to wait for rescue in hostile territory, but enough to reach the extraction coordinates he'd transmitted before the crash. "Command, this is Reed," he spoke into his damaged comm unit, knowing it was probably futile. "I'm down on Calvara. Repeat, down on Calvara. Multiple system failures. Cause unknown." Static answered him, punctuated by occasional bursts of distorted sound that might have been voices or might have been interference. His crash had taken out the long-range transmitter, leaving him with only a short-range beacon that might, if he was lucky, reach orbit in a few days. Marcus checked his oxygen levels and cursed. The recycler was working, but inefficiently. He had maybe 48 hours before he'd be breathing unfiltered Calvaran atmosphere, which would kill a human in less than an hour. He needed to move fast, reach higher ground where the air was marginally less toxic, and hope the rescue teams picked up his beacon. He'd taken 2 steps away from the wreckage when he saw her. At first, his oxygen-deprived brain registered her as debris, something pale against the purple sand. But debris didn't have that shape, that suggestion of limbs and curves. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand on the plasma pistol at his hip, every instinct trained into him screaming that aliens meant danger. Then he saw her face, and his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species. Despite the purple tone of her skin, her features were delicate and refined. High cheekbones, full lips now cracked and bleeding. Her blonde hair was matted with sand and blood. Her eyes were closed, but he could see the rapid flutter of her eyelids, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, barely. "Jesus," Marcus breathed, dropping to his knees beside her, his training warring with his humanity. She was Calvaran, the species Earth had been in cold war with for 30 decades. Taking her with him could be construed as kidnapping, starting an interstellar incident, ending his career. But leaving her here to die would haunt him forever. Her eyes opened, unfocused and glassy with fever and pain. They were the most striking amber color, like honey backlit by sunlight. She looked at him without fear, without surprise, as if a human appearing in her dying moments was just another impossible thing in an impossible day. "Hey," Marcus said softly, knowing she couldn't understand him but needing to say something. "Hey, I've got you. You're going to be okay." She said something in her language, words like music and water flowing over stones. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. Marcus didn't let himself think. He just acted, scooping her up and carrying her back to his ship. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel every bone through the thin ceremonial robes she wore. She'd been left here to die, he realized with sudden fury. This wasn't an accident or an attack. Someone deliberately abandoned her in the wasteland. Inside the ship's damaged shelter, Marcus laid her on the emergency thermal blanket and began triage. Dehydration, exposure, early stages of toxic inhalation. His medical kit wasn't designed for alien physiology, but the basics were universal. He started an IV drip of saline solution, adjusted the oxygen recycler to create a bubble of clean air around them both, and used the thermal blanket to regulate her body temperature. Her skin was so cold, like touching marble. Marcus found himself rubbing her arms and legs, trying to stimulate circulation, trying to bring warmth back into her failing system. Her purple skin was smooth under his calloused hands, unmarked except for the abrasions from the sand and wind. "Come on," he murmured, watching the medical scanner's readouts with growing anxiety. "Come on, don't give up now. You survived this long." The scanner beeped, showing her vitals stabilizing slightly. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. Marcus sagged against the bulkhead in relief. She wasn't out of danger yet, but she had a chance now. A fighting chance. As the Calvaran night deepened around his broken ship, Marcus found himself studying her face in the dim emergency lighting, wondering who she was, what she'd done to deserve exile on the wasteland, whether anyone would come looking for her, and why, despite every regulation and protocol he'd ever learned, he felt so fiercely protective of this alien stranger. She stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in her musical language, and Marcus reached out without thinking, his hand covering hers. "I've got you," he said again, a promise to the darkness. "I won't let you die out here. I don't care what it costs me." Outside, the twin moons of Calvara rose like watching eyes, and Marcus Reed settled in for a long night of keeping watch over the woman who would change everything he thought he knew about enemies and allies, about duty and choice, about the distance between one heart and another.
Desert Bonds. The second day began with Sarah's eyes opening to a reality that made no sense. She was alive, warm, and breathing air that didn't burn her lungs like acid. The human sat a few feet away, his dark eyes fixed on a device in his hands, monitoring something with the focused intensity of a healer or a guardian. When he noticed her watching him, his face transformed with relief and something else, something gentler. "You're awake?" he said. The words meaningless, but his tone unmistakable. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, producing only a rasping sound that made her wince. Immediately, the human was beside her, lifting her head carefully and bringing a container of water to her lips. She drank greedily, the cool liquid the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. "Slowly," he cautioned. Though she couldn't understand the word, his hand remained behind her head, supporting her with unexpected gentleness. "Slowly, or you'll make yourself sick." When she'd had enough, he lowered her back down, and Sarah finally took in her surroundings. They were inside the wreckage of his ship, the metal walls buckled and torn, but still providing shelter from the desert's fury. Medical equipment she didn't recognize was attached to her arm, and the air itself felt different, cleaner somehow. "You saved me," she said in her own language, knowing he wouldn't understand, but needing to say it anyway. "You had no reason to save me. Your people and mine have been enemies for generations, yet you saved me." The human tilted his head, clearly trying to parse meaning from her tone. He pointed to himself. "Marcus," he said clearly, then pointed to her with a questioning expression. "Sarah," she replied, understanding the exchange. "My name is Sarah." "Marcus," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his foreign accent made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Marcus spent the next hours working on something, occasionally glancing at her to ensure she was still stable. Sarah watched him with growing fascination. He moved with economy and purpose, his hands skilled and confident as he manipulated the alien technology. His face bore the marks of the crash, a healing cut across his forehead, bruising along his jaw, but he never complained or showed weakness. By the third day, Marcus had managed to repair something that resembled a translation device. It was crude, converting their words into simplified approximations, but it opened a bridge between their isolated worlds. "Why were you left in the desert?" Marcus asked, his words emerging from the device in stilted but comprehensible Kelvaran. Sarah looked away, shame and defiance warring in her chest. "I refused a marriage to a warlord named Draxon Morth. The council said I was choosing selfishness over duty. They gave me to the wasteland as punishment." She watched his face carefully, expecting judgment or confusion. Instead, his expression darkened with anger. "They left you to die because you wouldn't marry someone?" "Not just someone," Sarah explained, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Draxon is known for his cruelty. His previous wives, they lived in fear. I saw the bruises they tried to hide, heard the stories the servants whispered. I knew that marriage would destroy me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made her breath catch. "You were brave. Choosing death over a life of suffering takes courage." "My people would call it cowardice," Sarah replied bitterly. "Your people were wrong." Those three simple words, spoken with such conviction, brought tears to Sarah's eyes for the first time since her exile began. No one had ever told her she was right to refuse, to choose her own path. Not her tutors, not her friends, certainly not the council. The confined space of the shelter forced an intimacy between them that went beyond words. When fever struck Sarah again on the second night, Marcus stayed awake, bathing her forehead with precious water and adjusting the medical equipment with tired determination. When his own injuries troubled him, preventing sleep, Sarah found herself reaching out to touch his shoulder, offering what comfort she could despite the language barrier. On the third night, as the temperature plummeted outside their metal sanctuary, they huddled together for warmth, the thermal blanket wrapped around both of them. Sarah could feel Marcus's heartbeat against her back, strong and steady. so different from the rapid flutter of her own dual-chambered heart. "What will happen when your people come?" she asked quietly, her words flowing through the translator. Marcus's arm tightened slightly around her waist, a gesture that felt protective rather than possessive. "I don't know, but I won't let them hurt you. I promise you that." "You can't promise that," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. They were so close in the darkness. She could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You'll have your own consequences to face for saving me." "I don't care," Marcus replied, his hand coming up to brush a strand of blonde hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her purple cheek, the touch sending warmth through her entire body. "Marcus," she whispered, his name feeling right on her tongue. "Marcus," he breathed back, and in the space between their names, something fundamental shifted between them. Two people from enemy worlds finding in each other what they'd never found among their own kind: understanding, acceptance, the freedom to choose. The desert wind howled outside, but inside their shelter, wrapped in each other's warmth, Sarah felt safer than she had ever had in her own palace.
The choice. The rescue team arrived at dawn on the fourth day, their military transport blocking out the rising sun as it descended toward Marcus's crash site. Sarah woke to the sound of engines and felt Marcus's body go rigid with tension beside her. "They're here," he said quietly, already moving to help her sit up. "Stay close to me. Let me do the talking." Through the translator, Sarah heard the edge in his voice, the protective warning, but she also heard something else: fear. Marcus was afraid for her, and that realization made her throat tighten. The hatch opened, and 3 humans in military uniforms entered, their faces hardening when they saw Sarah. The lead officer, a woman with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes, fixed Marcus with a withering stare. "Lieutenant Reed, would you care to explain why you have a Calvara national in your custody?" "She was dying, Commander Vance," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the tremor Sarah could feel running through his hand where it gripped hers. "I provided emergency medical assistance as required by interstellar humanitarian protocols." Humanitarian protocols don't apply to military reconnaissance zones. Commander Vance stepped closer, her eyes sweeping over Sarah with clinical assessment. "She's coming with us for questioning. We need to determine if this was an elaborate trap or intelligence operation." "She's not a spy," Marcus said, his grip on Sarah's hand tightening. "She's in exile, left to die by her own people for refusing a forced marriage. She needs asylum, not interrogation." "That's not your call to make, Lieutenant." Sarah found her voice then, speaking through the translator with as much dignity as she could muster. "Commander Vance, I understand your suspicion, but Lieutenant Reed speaks the truth. I was cast out by my council for defying tradition. I have no allegiance to offer you, no intelligence of value. I am simply a woman who refused to be a tool in someone else's political games." Commander Vance's expression didn't soften, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or recognition. "If that's true, then you're a refugee. Refugees require processing, documentation, and extensive vetting before asylum can be granted. You'll be held in our facility until we can verify your story." "She stays with me," Marcus said, and Sarah heard the note of defiance in his voice that made her heart skip. "You're not in any position to make demands, Lieutenant. You've already violated protocols by bringing her aboard your vessel." "Then court-martial me," Marcus shot back, his jaw set in stubborn determination. "But I won't abandon her to become a prisoner in some holding cell. She's been through enough." The standoff stretched between them, tense and brittle, until finally Commander Vance sighed. "You're willing to stake your career on this, Reed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you're a fool." But there was something almost approving in the commander's tone. "Fine. She remains in your custody pending investigation, but you'll both report to command headquarters immediately. And Reed, if this goes badly,
It's your head on the line." As they were escorted to the transport, Sarah leaned close to Marcus, her voice barely audible over the engines. "You shouldn't have done that. You've risked everything for me." Marcus turned to look at her, his dark eyes soft despite the harsh military lighting. "You risked everything to be free. The least I could do was help you stay that way." Freedom's price. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in Marcus's assigned quarters at the human military base, staring out at the alien landscape of Earth through reinforced windows. The asylum hearing had been brutal. Hours of questioning, suspicious officials, and constant surveillance. But Marcus had been there through it all, advocating for her, defending her, refusing to let them treat her as anything less than a person deserving of respect. The door opened, and Marcus entered, exhaustion etched into his features, but relief lighting his eyes. "It's official," he said, crossing to her with quick strides. "Full asylum granted. You're free, Sarah. Truly free." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks as she turned to face him fully. "And what did it cost you?" "A formal reprimand, suspension from active duty for 6 months, and mandatory reassignment after that," Marcus said, but he was smiling. "Worth it." "Marcus, your career." "Will recover," he interrupted gently, reaching up to brush away her tears with his thumb. "Or it won't. Either way, I made my choice, and I'd make it again 1,000 times." They'd been so careful until now, maintaining professional distance despite the nights in the desert, despite the way their hands found each other during the stressful hearings, despite the growing certainty in her heart that this human had become more important to her than breath itself. But now, with the weight of official scrutiny lifted, with freedom finally real, Sarah allowed herself to step closer, to place her hands on Marcus's chest and feel his heart beating beneath her palms. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You've given me everything." "You don't owe me thanks," Marcus replied, his hand settling on her waist, pulling her closer still. "You gave me something too, you know. What could I have possibly have given you?" "Purpose," he said simply. "For years, I've followed orders, played the good soldier, never questioning the rules or the reasons behind them. Then I met you, and suddenly none of it mattered compared to doing what was right. You reminded me who I wanted to be." Sarah reached up, her fingers tracing the healing scar on his forehead, the mark of the crash that had brought them together. "We're both exiles now. In a way, cast out from where we came from." "Then we'll build something new," Marcus said, his arm around her, setting his hands on her waist, pulling her closer still. "Together, if you want that." "I want that," Sarah breathed. "I want you." When their lips met, it was soft and tentative at first, a question asked and answered, then deeper, more certain, as weeks of restrained longing finally found release. Marcus's hands tangled in her blonde hair while hers explored the strong lines of his back, learning the shape of him, memorizing this moment when everything changed. They broke apart breathless, and Sarah laughed, the sound startling her with genuine joy. "My people would be horrified." "Mine too," Marcus grinned. "Good thing we're not living for them anymore." Later, as they sat together watching Earth's single moon rise, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. Exiled for refusing a forced marriage, rescued by an enemy who became her savior, and finally free to choose her own destiny. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked, his arm around her, feeling safe and valued in a way she never had among her own people. She leaned into him. "Learn about this world, find work that matters to me, maybe help other refugees who end up here." She paused, then added softly, "Build a life with someone who sees me as an equal." "I like that plan." Marcus pressed a kiss to her temple. Outside, the universe continued its ancient dance of conflict and alliance, of borders and treaties. But inside these walls, two hearts beat in rhythm, proof that connection transcends politics, that love recognizes no species, and that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply choosing who you want to be
and who you want to be with. Sarah Vane was cast out for refusing a forced marriage, left to die in a wasteland. She never expected a human to rescue her, and she certainly never expected to find in that rescue the greatest gift of all, the freedom to love on her own terms.